This is part 9 of What If Deku's Mom Died. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe for more fanfic videos. Izuku pulled away breathless, tongue running over his bottom lip as his forehead rested against her own. Viridian orbs slid open to meet blazing crimson, caramel cheeks pulled in a wide grin, while a tiny pink tongue darted across pearly whites. "What now?" he asked, thumb tracing circles on her side while his fingers pressed her against him obsessively. She winked, the boy's grip tightening at the act as slender fingers buried themselves in green locks. "You're gonna kiss me until I drag you home. Think you can do that?" His face split in a grin as he nodded. "Then get to it." He needed no further prompting, pushing forward and devouring dangerously tender lips in hot, needy kisses. Rumi made a noise of approval as her lips parted ever so slightly, the taste of cold mint filling her mouth for a brief moment. It passed just as quickly as it was replaced by a hot tongue, the two fighting in her own mouth as Izuku moaned into the kiss. The boy was barely able to widen his eyes as she hooked her ankle behind his knee, knocking them both to the ground with her straddling his core. White hair fell in a curtain around them as she dove down, lips pulling at his own as her elbows found themselves on either side of his head. She moaned in approval as calloused hands rubbed her thighs, terse muscle lying just under the surface as he squeezed malleable flesh. Her lips parted in a slight gasp as he squeezed her thigh with near-bruising strength, the boy diving forward and claiming her lips as he sat up. Rumi fell into his lap as he hounded her lips, parting away from them with a desperate breath of air. Izuku didn't hesitate to move his mouth, beginning to suckle on her jaw as his arms wound around her waist. His lips roamed, the beautiful woman craning her neck as he kissed down it, and to the junction of where muscle met neck. He kissed it as his hands closed on her waist, running up and down her back as he suckled on her neck. She panted in his ear as his teeth ever so slightly grazed over her soft skin, slight red scrapes stark on her caramel skin. "If you bite me," she murmured, one hand gripping the other side of his head as her free arm wound around her neck. Izuku shivered as hot breath flooded his ear, the woman running her lips over the edge of his lobe. "I'll bite back." She nipped his lobe ever so slightly, and he groaned beneath her. His hands slid down to grip her tighter, surprising both of them as his fingers ran into her small little tail. His eyes widened as she gave a high-pitched gasp, one he'd never heard from her. His lips grinned against her, hand raising from her hot skin. "I swear to ah!" She gave a loud moan as he suddenly gripped her tail, her hips bucking as both of them groaned at the motion. She panted rapidly, Izuku feeling her begin to sweat against him as he nipped at her skin ever so slightly, while his hand rolled her tail around in it. He could feel the tiny little center of it, the white fluff, nothing but that, as he squeezed the true tail. She clamped her teeth on his shoulder, the boy groaning lowly at the slight pain it brought, and his grip tightened. She gave another, drawn-out moan against him as he kissed along her neck, fingers continuing to play with her tail. A light growl broke itself from Izuku's lips as he felt the uncomfortable confines of his shorts between the two of them. "I really want you, Rumi-chan." His free hand ran up her side, just ever so slightly under her top and tickling the skin of her ribs. He felt her pull away before he saw her, feeling the saliva on his shoulder cool in the breeze. He nearly buckled at the sheer heat behind her eyes as liquid pools of fire met blazing green emerald. She dove forward, a kiss of sheer primal lust pouring itself out between them as she cupped the sides of his head. "Get us behind a door We won't leave till we're satisfied." He moaned as she literally said the word in his mouth, feeling her own hot saliva mingle with his as they devoured each other. "So never?" he muttered, the both of them grinning like loons as she stroked his cheek. "I like the way you think, kid. Now, you've got less than 2 minutes for us to make it to mine before I rip your pants open." She shot up with her own words, Izuku darting away and grabbing his sweater, showing the series of condoms in the pouch of it as she grinned broad. Good boy. They hadn't even lasted to her room. "Ah!" Rumi moaned in his ear hotly as Izuku shoved her into the side of the elevator, her legs locked around his waist as his hands gripped her hips like never before, while he devoured her essence. "If you have a small dick, I won't ever forgive you." He gave a brief laugh before diving back into her lips, suckling on her tongue and nipping at it as he did so. She continued to give low moans in his mouth while their heat mixed, the two of them grinding against one another. Dexterous fingers pulled and tugged at green locks, hot pants, and moans filling the elevator as the two continued to push each other further and further into the depths of lust. He dove forward, pushing past her lips as she craned her neck to the side. His lips clamped on her neck as his teeth began to nip and graze, her hot pants filling his ear as she nibbled on his ear. He grinned against her neck before biting, the faint noise of hearing her gasp his only warning before she bit on his own ear. He hissed in a mixture of pleasure and pain as he pulled away, meeting her lips with his own as she tried to devour him. He dimly tasted the iron of his own blood on her tongue, green eyes sliding open to meet knowing red orbs. What, gonna get payback for it? If anything, she seemed excited by her own question as he reached up and felt his own ear. His fingers were dabbed with droplets of blood, his eyes staring at the red life fluid. "Let me." The words were low, and he gave a gasp as she leaned forward, sucking on his fingers as her eyes stayed trained on his own. He gave a low, shaky breath as her cheeks hollowed, feeling the entirety of her warm, hot mouth around his fingers. Despite the blood having only been on the tips of his fingers, she continued to devour his fingers all the way to the knuckle before slowly pulling off of them. Her lips popped off with a gasp, his digits coated in a sheen of saliva as a strand connected her lips and his fingers. He'd never been more turned on in his life. She gave the tips of his fingers a kiss, arms wounding around his neck as she bucked her hips against him. He gave a groan, fingers pulling at the elastic band of her shorts at the movement. "That was just a preview for later," she whispered, beginning to suck on the wound she'd created. The two stilled at the ding of the elevator, breaking apart as she walked in front of him. The doors slid open as his eyes trailed down, the shorts just a tad too high as he spotted the beginning curvature of her rear. He barely stifled a groan as the elevator stopped. The doors slid open, no one before them, as they slowly slid shut. He couldn't resist. "Ah!" His hand splayed itself across her right cheek before squeezing, feeling her flex it beneath him as he groaned at the feeling of the softness with an undertone of muscle. "Does someone like my ass?" His head dipped down, kissing on her neck as his fingers tensed and squeezed. "Good, I've worked for it." "I love it." She gave a breathless laugh, craning her head to the side as her arm pulled against her neck more. "It needs lots of attention," she whispered, eyes fluttering shut as he continued to lay long, wet kisses. "I really need your shorts out of the way." He mumbled, her eyes flicking open with a fire of passion as she met his own green orbs. She felt a shudder go down her spine at the pure, unconditional desire behind them as she grinned. The elevator dinged again as the doors began to slide open, the door to her flat a few feet away. She leaned up, hands pressing on his nape as he bent down to kiss her. Rumi's eyes burned with a playful desire as her hands crept around and to his chest. Izuku gave a groan as his back slammed into the elevator, her eyes and smirk taunting him. "Come and fuck me!" And she was already through the door by the time he was off the wall, slamming the front door open just as he heard her room door click shut. "AKA, we're gonna be loud!" He ran to the source of the call, pushing open the door to her room as the door opposite it slipped open. He barely made eye contact with the redhead before he was in Rumi's room, too caught up in his desire to fixate on the woman in the hall. Rumi met his eyes challengingly as she spread her arms wide, stood at the foot of her bed, and looking just as turned on and desperate as him. He burst forward, literally floating over the ground before he grabbed her by the waist and picked her up. A brief flash of apprehension flooded through him, the thought of losing his virginity ever so slightly making him hesitant. She must have seen it because she pinched his jaw and made him look at her, red eyes heavy in lust and lips pulled in a grin. "Come on, kid, make me scream." He exploded in movement, shoving them higher up the bed as his hand gripped her wrist. Her eyes widened ever so slightly before he had both of her wrists in his hands, gripping them tight against her headboard as his lips attacked her own mouth. She arched against him, trying to pull her hands free only for him to bite her lip and force her hands into the headboard. It thrilled her like no fight could as her lips parted, cute, needy gasps breaking from her lips as he continued to attack her bottom lip and tongue. She felt her hands shake and her lips quiver as he continued to kiss her for all she was worth, bulge grinding against her core needily as they humped at one another. He gasped for air, biting down on her jaw as the flesh slid against his teeth. His eyes honed in on the red marks he'd already left, feeling his chest swell in pride and his penis pulse with need at the sight. He clamped his teeth on the marks, biting down on them more so as she cooed and groaned at the bites. Caramel legs wrapped around his waist as he groaned, her powerful legs practically forcing him against her hot, damp core. "Get in me already!" She ordered in his ear, the teen letting go of her wrists as he rose to his knees. He once more shed his sweater, taking the packets of condoms from it and breaking off one. He caught the sight of her tank, flying through the air, eyes snapping to her and her chest. She grinned, cupping her own breasts as she ran her tongue over her lip. "Do you like?" He gave a stifled groan at her words, falling onto his back and shimming off his shorts and underwear. Good job on having such a hot dick." He gave a pant at the words, her own dirty talk getting to him as he tore at the package. Izuku barely saw the black, short shorts fly through the air before she was straddling his thighs. He stared at her, round caramel breasts topped with little drops of chocolate that he found himself mesmerized by. His gaze traveled down reluctantly, defined midriff, making his dick throb as his gaze found itself fixated on the mouth of her shimmering pussy. "Give." She snatched the condom from his hand, ripping it from the package before bringing it to his tip. She stopped, Izuku furrowing his brow as she just stopped and stared. He got his answer a moment later when she ran her nails up the underside of his dick, the teen arching in pleasure as she grinned before slipping the condom on. His hands found her thighs as he ran his fingers over flexing skin, the woman raising up until he felt her pressing against him slightly. "Look at me." Izuku's eyes dragged up at her words, half-lidded green meeting, half-lidded red as she grinned. His mouth parted wide as she slowly began to sink down, tauntingly and teasingly as she gave low pants and huffs. His eyes honed in on her lip bite. The feeling of the hot, squeezing depths of her felt so right that his knees squirmed. "What? Does someone want me to hurry?" Her hips rolled at her own words as Izuku groaned, fingers beginning to squeeze her thighs as he fought to restrain himself. "Fine. Let's rock." Their moans were loud and mixed as she sunk nearly all the way down, sat on him as he felt her globes rest against his thighs. He gave another pant as she rose before going down a bit again, doing the motion again and again as he panted and groaned. Her moans began to fill the room as she started to go faster and faster, a rhythm building as the clap of her rear on his thighs joined their noises. His eyes peered open, right hand creeping up and cupping her breast, while his left held her hip and squeezed. She moaned at his tough, one hand pushing onto his abs as she leaned into his hand. He palmed the orb, fingers squeezing and grazing as he ran his nails over the top of her breast. Her light moans filled his ears, her blush bright, and the sweat and heat between them enough to warm the whole room. His thumb came to over her nipple, pushing down on it as the speed she rode him sped up rapidly. He groaned, feeling her insides squeeze him tightly as his index finger came up. The nipple was rolled between his fingers, the woman moaning above him as she bit her lip, and her eyes shut. Both her hands pushed down on his core, the stabilization needed as she proceeded to ride harder and faster. Izuku gave a low moan, both hands coming to her hips and helping her up and down. The heat between them became stifling as the two drowned in one another. "Rumi-chan, I'm gonna—" She slammed down on him, hard. He gave a drawn-out moan, the woman falling onto him and slamming her mouth to his own. His hands crept up and behind as he reciprocated, hands squeezing her rear as he felt his dick continue to throb and pulse deep inside her. "God," she whispered, face hovering just over his own as she grinned. "You make me so full." He grinned shakily, pushing them both into a sitting position. Rumi gave a light sigh as his penis jerked to life inside her. "Good boy. Now screw me senseless." His grin turned primal, twisting and tossing the woman further into the bed and off of him. They both cooed at the abrupt loss of their conjunction. He took off the condom, not caring as he tossed it to the side and opened a new one. "You're going to stain my carpet," she whispered, curling a lock of hair with her finger as she grinned at him, twisting and pinching her own nipple. "And I'll stain your sheets," he whispered, the woman giving a moan at the words as he got closer. She wrapped her legs around him as soon as possible, watching his dick throb just above her hot, sopping core. "Bang my ass into them!" He gave a low growl at her talk, pulling back just enough and angling the tip at her entrance. "Get in!" Her legs shoved him into her, the teen having to brace himself with his hands at the top of her headboard. They both moaned as the back of her head hit the headboard. His hips pushed out and in, the two huffing and panting as he dipped down. He took her nipple into his mouth as his lips surrounded her areola, the woman beneath him giving low, helpless moans, as one hand buried itself in his hair and the other pushed against the headboard. She moaned harder at his vigor, feeling his hands squeeze her waist harder and harder. "Stop being a little pussy!" She jerked him back by the hair, smoldering crimson meeting blazing emerald. "You've got quirks, use 'em!" Confusion momentarily flashed across his face before understanding dawned, the thrusting of his hips stalling as they both squirmed. Izuku's entire body began to thrum as Rumi gave a lip-biting moan, practically screaming as he began to vibrate against her. Weightlessness barely fell over them before they were flying across the room. Ah! The gasp was followed by a dim crack as the two slammed into the wall, the woman digging her nails into his shoulders at the abrupt action. That's it! They rutted right there, Izuku pulling her by the hips to meet him as he slammed into her again and again. He moaned into their kiss as drool dribbled down from between their mouths, the feeling of it sliding down his body, an absent thought as they made out. The heat between them rose higher and higher before Izuku suddenly grit his teeth, pulling away from the kiss as his entire body buzzed harder and harder. "Oh, damn!" she screamed as he buzzed inside her, the feeling of his vibrating heat drilling into her again and again, enough to send her over the edge as Izuku fell against her. His quirk faded as the two leaned against one another, Izuku running his hand up her side as she laid impaled upon him. "I'm good for a bit of a nap now," she murmured, the wind fleeting from them as he nodded. His arms wrapped around her, carrying her to the bed and laying the both of them down. "You cracked my wall." "Sorry," he muttered, staring at the wall in surprise, before pulling out slowly. He gave a hiss at the loss of heat, clamping on him as he peeled off the condom. He dropped it onto the one already on the floor with a sigh. "I don't care. That was the best thing I've ever had." He smiled at her words, falling into the bed beside her as they nuzzled against one another. Red eyes stared into green as he wrapped his arms around her waist, slowly, her one hand cupping his cheek. "You better be ready to get back to it when we wake up." "Yes, ma'am," Izuku responded, kissing the inside of her wrist with a grin as she shook her head. He pulled the comforter over them both, her face burying in his chest as he buried his own in her soft ears. She gave a coo of endorsement as her own arms snaked around his back. The two had worn themselves out before lunch. Izuku yawned, patting the bed beside him as he noticed the absence of its other occupant. He blinked before paling at the sight of it nearing dusk, checking the clock to note it was not even 6 yet. He gave a sigh of relief before throwing on his shorts, stepping around the used condoms and sparing a glance at the cracked wall. Green tresses swayed as he shook his head, exiting the room and slipping through the hallway. He noticed the main area empty and a sliver of movement from the kitchen. His eyes sparked at the sight of Rumi wearing his sweater and absolutely nothing else. He felt a shiver of too many emotions to name go through him, walking up behind the woman. He noted the orange smoothie she was blending as an afterthought as he crept up behind her. Rumi stiffened as a hand moved over her butt, squeezing the right cheek gingerly as she felt Izuku become flush with her back. She tilted her head, meeting him in a kiss that had her big toe curling. "Morning," he rumbled, leant into her heavily as his hand never stopped fondling her rear. "You mean evening, idiot?" Izuku shrugged, watching her finish, adding bits to the smoothie. "It needs banana." She elbowed him softly, the teen chuckling as his free arms snaked around her front and rubbed her midriff. "You're really hot in my sweater." "That makes sense. I'm hot in everything." He gave a hum, kissing the base of her ear, which twitched under the treatment as she gave a shudder. "Yeah, you are." Izuku agreed, kissing down her neck as she gave a snort that fell as she simply stood there. "I thought we were going to go again." "I got tired of waiting, decided I need the energy," she said simply, stiffening as his free hand slipped under the sweater and began teasing the underside of her breast. "AKA's still gone, and I still feel like I need to scream." "Definitely," he rumbled, hand leaving her rear and snaking around her front. She pushed back against him, grinding her full rear into his front as he groaned. His fingers closed around the front of her inner thigh as she gave a shuddering sigh of excitement, feeling him rub the inside of her thigh again and again, even as his fingertips teased the curve of her breast. "And you said I'm a tease," she murmured, eyes fluttering shut, smoothly forgotten as she felt herself be peppered in pleasure. She gave a gasp as she jolted up, barely standing on her toes as his fingers went into her. At the same time, he rubbed his thumb over her nipple. She gave a shaky breath, leant against him entirely as he fingered her aggressively right there. "Brat," she mumbled out, Izuku giving a hum against her neck as his fingers continued to violate her depths. "I want a better name, something other than Brat," he rumbled, nipping at her neck. "Fine, kid, yeah." She jerked at the feeling of him pinching her outer fold. The woman left biting her lip harshly as his thumb rolled over her nipple again and again. "I deserve an upgrade," Izuku muttered, rubbing his mouth over her skin as she gave a deep, shaky sigh. He jerked his fingers away, only cupping the underside of her breast as she gave a small whine. "Finish me off." Her gaze met his, smoldering crimson burning with heat, meeting tilted viridian. "Now. Give me a better name, Rumi-chan." He flicked the outside of her fold as her lips parted in a hot breath. "I promise. I'll make sure you're really satisfied. Just give." She actually gave a light scream as he pinched her outer fold once more. "A name." "Babe." He paused at the word that seemed to squeak from her lips. "Come on, that's all you're going to get from me. Now finish me off." "Yes, babe." She met his eyes in a glare, only for her head to snap back against his shoulder as her eyes fluttered closed. Her arms snapped up, pulling his head into her shoulder as she rose to the very tips of her toes. She panted in his ear as he fingered her deep and slow, biting her lip as his fingernails scraped her slightly. Izuku kissed her shoulder, feeling the marbled skin pull him in tighter as he slowly flicked her nipple with his free hand. "Ah!" He felt her back arch deep, his lips pulling into a smile at her pleasure as he tilted his head. The teen laid feather-light kisses along her neck, slowly climbing up. He felt her trickle down his fingers, her heat reaching an all-time high as she radiated warmth against him. She slowly slumped back down as his fingers retracted, the woman collapsing into him slowly. "Your ears go straight when you orgasm," he mumbled, grinning at the dry glare she gave him. "Shut up and kiss me." His smile grew at the breathy request, dipping forward and meeting her lips tenderly. He suckled on her lip until his forehead touched her own warm one. "So, can we get back to it?" He pushed against her ever so slightly, the fresh bulge in his shorts more than a bit noticeable as her smile sharpened. "Sure, babe." Izuku's grin broadened at her words, spinning them until he was picking her up by the thighs. She laughed, strong legs wrapping around him, even as they practically tried to devour one another. Lust is carnal, after all. Rumi gave a light sigh, enjoying the sensation of him holding her as they watched some show she hadn't even paid much attention to. She ignored the niggling thought that she hadn't done any hero work today and that there'd be questions about it. "You okay?" he muttered, head resting atop her own from between her ears as she gave a hum of acknowledgement. "Good talk." She snorted at his sarcasm, feeling him kiss the side of her ear ever so lightly. Her tail twitched against his midriff at the attention as she nuzzled against him slightly. His fingers ghosted under her chin as his free hand teased her belly button. She allowed herself to be pushed up, twisting in his lap easily to face him as he simply held her close. Both smiled lightly at the comfortable feeling they'd created, her hands running over his sides slowly as his own fingers left feather-light touches across her back. "I have to go soon," Izuku admitted, the sun having dipped below the horizon more than a few hours ago, his eyes on the night sky. Her hands gripped his head, turning it back to her forcefully as he gave her a loose grin. "Will you miss me?" "As if," she murmured, easing her lips against his own as he hummed against her. She felt his tongue begin to slip her into her mouth as the teen tried to deepen the kiss. Izuku hissed, jerking his head back as the familiar taste of iron filled his mouth. He dabbed at his tongue, the digit coming back slightly red as green eyes met red. "What was that for?" he grumbled, tongue stinging as he tried to rush the bleeding. "What, gonna punish me?" she whispered, arms circling his neck as he met her saucy grin with a growl. "Or are you just gonna let me do what I want to you?" "You're not my boss yet, babe." She grinned, sitting up as she loomed over him slightly. "Oh, this is going to be a good week." He met her grin with one of his own as she dipped down, and the two met in a kiss that would have made both blush a year ago. "Oh, come on!" The two broke apart, turning to the red-haired woman that just entered the apartment with an exhausted air about her. "I've been gone 8 hours. How are you two not done yet?" Both blinked owlishly at the woman before glancing at another. "Because I'm irresistible?" Rumi questioned, sounding as though it were obvious as Akamine shook her head. Izuku snorted softly, relishing the feel of her skin despite the stinging in his tongue. "At least you're both clothed." She glanced at the tank top and thong Rumi donned, Izuku in simple shorts. "Ish." The woman meandered into the kitchen with a takeout container. "Hey," Izuku whispered, "did you ever clean up your mess in there?" She furrowed her brow at the question. "What mess?" The boy blanched at the woman's clueless state. "Rumi." The two slowly turned to the redhead in the kitchen doorway, Izuku slowly trying to sink into the couch despite not being the target of her ire. "Oh, sorry about the smoothie. I'll clean that out later." The pro-hero shrugged off the drink she'd forgotten about, her roommate twitching. "It's not about the smoothie," Akamine grit out, pointing at the ground of the kitchen. "It's about what's on the floor." Rumi's brow knit in confusion. "On the— Oh!" The woman actually blushed ever so slightly. "That's his fault. Make him clean it up." "What?" Izuku squawked, poking the woman in his lap. "Nah, uh-huh. I didn't spontaneously orgasm." A slight dash of red came to Izuku's cheeks at the words. "Then you should have cleaned up my mess." He returned, thinking of having to clean her floor and toss her bedding in the wash. "I've got to fix the wall that you cracked," she barked, sticking a finger in his chest as he glowered at her. "You what?" Izuku paled at the deathly low tone of the woman. "Ah, I don't want to break curfew. Aizawa-sensei is really harsh about that kind of thing." He pinched her tail as a momentary distraction, breaking free as her nail barely scraped his back in her attempt to grab him. "The hell you're getting out of this so easily," she growled, storming up to march after him. "I swear to God if you don't clean the floor first." The white-haired hero stilled at the words from her roommate, the woman giving her a glare that could make ice shiver. Rumi gave a grumble, thumping into the kitchen to clean her mess. Akamine sighed behind the woman, head in her hands. "I need a vacation." "Oi, deku." Izuku paused in his stride, having just entered the building and making his way to his room. The boy spun, meeting crimson orbs so similar yet different from the ones he'd left a mere hour ago. "Yeah, Kachan?" The blonde's brow lowered at the childhood nickname, and his gaze became scolding as Izuku felt a draft go down his shirt. the sight of the other boy's clear animosity making his pulse thrum in preparation. Izuku had seen that stare in his father, in Shigaraki, in Bakugo himself, for nearly a decade now. That anger and wanting to cause the person pain. The bloodthirst. Let's take a walk. The moment passed as quick as it came, and Bakugo had already stepped past Izuku, the Viridian-haired boy trying to calm himself as his fingers began to twitch. He set down his pack and left himself in only his sweater and shorts, falling into step behind the boy he considered his oldest friend. Izuku felt his adrenaline begin to kick up at the sheer thought of fighting Bakugo, remembering their brawl in the center of the arena, while also remembering the warning that Aizawa had given. A shudder crept down Izuku's back as he let out a deep exhale, noting the tension in Bakugo's shoulders and stiffness in his stride, and Izuku knew at that moment Bakugo didn't want to fight. He wanted to make Izuku hurt. The tension spoke for itself as the walk itself was made in silence, the low, dark sky lit only by the clouded moon. Izuku thought about walking back, saying no, and not fighting Bakugo. But he wanted this too. Power buzzed under Izuku's skin, his blood beginning to bubble and boil as he mentally readied himself for the fight. Izuku was sure that Bakugo felt the same way as he, that neither of them had fought as they truly wanted, as they truly needed. None of them understand. Izuku jolted at the silence being broken by Bakugo as his attention went to the back of the blonde's head, the looming city towers becoming encompassing around them as they came to the wall surrounding the training area. Not even half and half. No one understands. Before Izuku could question Bakugo on the words, the blonde rocketed himself over the wall, and green eyes shut with a sigh. He knew that only trouble could come from this, only pain and punishment. Izuku's breath left him in a deep sigh as he propelled himself over the wall, falling into step once more behind Katsuki, who had already begun walking down the street. "My quirk? It's strong enough to make me number one," Bakugo murmured, hand popping and crackling as they came to a stop in an intersection in the midst of the city. "All Might won't be around forever, and my quirk definitely would have been enough to put me in his spot. So why? Why'd he choose you?" Time seemed to still as those words make a chill go through Izuku that seemed to rattle his very bones, the boy stilling in the night air as he felt his body clench up at the words. Katsuki finally turned, crimson eyes meeting emerald as he scoffed, looking away from Izuku. "What? Did you think I'd never figure it out? Why, he always looks at you in training, how the power is a lot like his, how you always seem to disappear at the same time as him. I know I'm right." Izuku swallowed, feet cementing themselves on the ground as his spine straightened as his eyes narrowed in on Bakugo. The blonde sneered back at meeting Izuku's resolute stare. "And what will you do with that information if it's true?" "Chish, still trying to keep it a secret, huh?" Bakugo growled, entire body seeming to pulse as his palm crackled louder and louder like a wrapper being balled up. "As if I'll accept that." His palm slammed backwards and blasted out an explosion that shattered windows and scorched roads, the air becoming saturated in smoke and ash as Bakugo blew forward from the propulsion, smoke and dust clinging to him like the cloak of a wraith as he crossed the distance quicker than Izuku could have possibly foreseen. Izuku's arms crossed in a hurried crossguard as Bakugo's fist drew back, the speed behind him sending the fist forward and slamming it into Izuku's defense. Midoriya hissed as he was sent tumbling, his bones creaking and his skin blistering as he felt the blow take its toll on him. Izuku slowed to a stop with a groan, arms shaking slightly at the pain as he gave a shuddering breath. His arms continued to shake, even as he pulled them apart, sharp green eyes meeting smoldering red as Bakugo scoffed. "All this time, you've been laughing at me. I can tell you have been, you, shitty hair, all might, all those damn extras." Bakugo's fist clenched to the point Izuku could hear it as the greenette forced himself up. "Playing me like some damn joke." "That's not true, Kachan. That's—" Izuku gasped as Float slammed into gear, Midoriya blasting to the right, just as Bakugo crossed the distance between them even quicker than he had last time. Izuku watched the blonde's fist crack through the air, only for his open palm to snap out to the side, green eyes widening at the movement as crimson orbs met his. "Don't fuck with me!" The blonde's left palm sent an explosion rocketing to the side, shaking the buildings around him and having glass shatter around them. But Izuku paid it little mind, Bakugo sailing through the air to the point he was right over Izuku in a snap decision, palms glowing as he aimed them down. Izuku's arms spun even as his feet kicked off, popping, filling his ears as he winced at the sheer proximity of the explosion, the heat akin to a furnace as it washed over him in wide rows as the harnessed explosion rocketed into the ground where he'd been standing. Izuku's knuckles bashed across Bakugo's face, the blonde's very face contorting beneath his fist, but his red eyes never left Izuku's, so full of hate and anger that it had Izuku chilled. Bakugo was sent rocketing away, and Izuku adopted a stance, gulping at the sight of the crater in the ground beside him as Katsuki willed himself to stand. "It's all I can hear," Bakugo rasped, standing slowly to reveal the dark red mark on his cheek from where Izuku had hit and his cheek swelling slowly. "Your laughter, all of you, playing me the damn fool, always saying how I'll never be a great hero with my attitude. Well, fucking watch me." Izuku winced, sailing to the side as Bakugo rocketed through the air where he'd been with a deafening crack that sounded like a whip on skin. Izuku's clothes billowing at the gust Bakugo's power incurred, and his jaw set before he blasted into action after the blonde. Bakugo's eyes caught sight of Izuku crackling with green electric bolts of energy, the other teen having enough power in his arms to level skyscrapers and swinging that same power at Bakugo himself. The blonde's arms came up in a hasty guard as the fist connected with the strength of 100 men, sending Bakugo hurtling down the street and crashing through a light pole. Katsuki was left hissing in pain as the stinging in his back screamed at him, the bent metal pole to his side telling him just how much force he'd hit that with. His eyes widened as Izuku flew into existence above him, leg arched high in a buzzing axe kick. Bakugo let out a loud curse and blasted to the side, wind blasting over him as chunks of cement were sent flying from Izuku's blow against the hard cement sidewalk. Bakugo had barely gotten to his feet by the time he was already dodging again, another kick swinging where his head had been and his palm beginning to glow with power as he aimed it in the greenette's direction. The explosion rocked his eardrums, but the blonde didn't hesitate, combat intelligence taking the reins as he leapt back not a moment too soon as Izuku once more crashed through the smoke akin to bull, his skin blistered and his sweater now missing, the greenette's lips drawn into a snarl as charged after Bakugo. Izuku sent a buzzing back fist for Bakugo's head, eyes widening as the blonde fell beneath it, and wasn't able to move in time for a sharp elbow to crack against his chin. Izuku hissed in pain and was sent stumbling back, letting Float carry him away as an explosion caked the area in dark smoke. Izuku panted and huffed, struggling to get his breathing under control as his jaw ached, only for him to see Bakugo charge from the cloud, wreathed in smoke. The greenette rocketed down faster than a natural disaster, leg buzzing as he brought it down onto Bakugo. He gasped as his legs sailed through the smoke, the dust blasting away as the feel of the ground cracking beneath him was numbly registered as his neck snapped around. He met two glowing palms held in front of one dark grin. Bang! Izuku's scream sent a chill down Bakugo's spine. Dark eyes bearing down on the crater Izuku had shattered himself into in the side of the wall. Bakugo growled before slapping his wrists together, the feeling of his sweat drying up beneath his own power, an idle realization as he bit out his attack while he felt warmth encompass his hands in a familiar embrace. One would have thought the sun itself formed in Bakugo's palms as the entire training area grew silent for a long moment that seemed to drag on for eternity as the ball grew brighter and stronger. And then there was chaos. AP shot! The scream was the beginning to a noise that blocked out all other as the light drained from the sky and lights around them, the ball in Bakugo's hands twitching once before it exploded outwards in a beam of yellow light so bright and volatile one would think it were made of pure plasma. The blast entered the building before Bakugo, and a heartbeat passed before it shattered every window in the building and blasted out the other side, a blast of fire and explosives so strong one would think they were made from the strongest bombs on Earth. Bakugo merely grinned as the light died away, a massive hole clear through the building glowing orange where there was still wall and support as the heat from the explosion melted into it. Time seemed to slow as the building groaned for a long moment, and then the hole was filled by the internal collapsing of the building, the walls and window frames beginning to cave in on themselves as glass shattered and rocks thudded against the ground, hard enough to shake it as Bakugo watched his power send the building down. Several moments passed as only destruction remained before Bakugo, the dust having settled long ago, and the last wall having fallen, as all that remained was a totaled building left in nothing but its own rubble. A brief thought flashed through Bakugo as he stared at the unmoving rubble. "Did I kill him?" he muttered, staring at the place he'd last seen Midoriya before he had the entire building crash on Deku's head. Bakugo's emotions warred with themselves as he flipped between regret and relief. A flash of green light from behind him had him reacting in an instant, hand spinning through the air and arching for behind him as it popped and cracked. He felt a grip tighter than iron slap on his wrist as he barely caught sight of hard green eyes as he let go of his power, palm glowing bright as his arm was jerked up. The explosion shot high into the air in a blast that sent dust clearing and left the two with ringing ears as the ash fell around them. Izuku utilized his grip on Bakugo's wrist and slammed the blonde into the ground, blistered cheek on full display as he forced the blonde into a submission hold on the ground. "That would have killed me," Izuku growled, grip tightening on Bakugo's wrists with the words. Bakugo snarled, face contorted in rage and anguish as he snapped his teeth at Izuku. "I gave you my all. There's no way you escape that. I hate you, Deku. I wish you'd never been born. Maybe if Auntie Inko hadn't had you, maybe she'd still be alive." Silence followed Bakugo's declaration as Izuku's head hung, the blonde seething beneath him. Izuku's fist tightened on Bakugo's wrist to the point Bakugo was hissing in pain as Izuku's free hand drew back. Crimson eyes widened as they met Izuku's own, the boy's face drenched in fury and rage, unlike any Bakugo had ever seen. Izuku growled, eyes sparking yellow as his fist began to glow so bright that it left Bakugo flinching at the light, even as a feeling of impending doom washed over him. The buzzing energy, mere feet away, flickering against Bakugo's skin as it grew brighter than Bakugo had ever seen. "Show crack! 100%! Izuku roared, the wind kicking up around them as the power in Izuku's arm caused the very weather around them to conform to the Greenette's will. Bakugo's eyes widening in a mixture of fear and awe at the power on display. Izuku gave a choked gasp as a dull pain lanced from his nape, feeling consciousness leave him, as well as the addictive power and rage, while his head lolled back just enough to see bright blonde hair and dark, shadowed eyes. That's quite enough. That's the end of Chapter 9. I hope you enjoy the fanfic. Please leave a fanfiction of any kind in the comments that you would like to see in a video.